I'm Tyler Mathis, President and CEO of the Cape Breton Partnership, and on behalf of the organizers of this event, I'm happy to welcome you to tonight's conversation, and it is a conversation both with people up here and people in the crowd, on the impact of transportation costs on life and work in Unama'ki, Cape Breton. The organizers of tonight's discussion, I'll mention them from the front, the Cape Breton Regional Chamber of Commerce, and welcome especially to the Vice Chair, Shelley Bennett-Triffus. I saw Shelley somewhere. Right there. Almost got away with it. The Port of Sydney Development Corporation, CEO Lorna Nicol is in the room, and they're our gracious hosts for this evening's discussion. The Scotia Rail Development Society, which was really the catalyst for much of these discussions, so we're happy to partner with them. And of course, the J.A. McCurdy Sydney Airport, Cape Breton University, the CBRM Regional Enterprise Network, and the Cape Breton Partnership. How this generally works is we're going to start with a small panel, 3 people, myself as moderator, to give us a base understanding of what we're trying to talk about here, and then there'll be a larger conversation with business owners from a wider diversity of experience and geography. And so I'm going to welcome our first 3 panelists up, and then I'll go finish kind of the housekeeping things. But first we have Paul Harrington with the Cape Breton Capital Group, and also from St. Peter's. So Paul, you get the pick of the seats. So everybody can judge you depending on where you sit. Dan McDonald, DMDE Engineering Limited and Vice Chair of the Cape Breton Partnership. And Kathleen Yurchison, VP Operations and Corporate Development with Novaport, and no stranger to this stage as the former CEO of the Chamber of Commerce. So welcome to all 3 of you. So we have these 3 people who are experts in their fields, have had lots of time to think about transportation systems, but we're starting with Paul Harrington with the Cape Breton Capital Group. And so Paul, maybe I'll get you to start with a little bit about what that means for those who don't, and maybe starting with a question that we had. And folks, we're not just coming up with these offhand. I literally have them written here, so I'm going to read them. In what ways can improvements to Cape Breton's transportation system help reduce the costs of goods and services, making them more affordable to local communities?
Sure. So for those who know about the Cape Breton Capital Group, we look at, it's an island group of angels that look to invest in entrepreneurs and succession planning for existing businesses on the island. And we only look and invest within the island. So that's a very high level overview. So from my perspective, I just want to throw out one aspect on infrastructure investment. Under the Global Infrastructure Hub of 2020, they said that any infrastructure investment had a multiplier of 1.5. In other words, for every dollar you spend, there will be an economic and benefits amplified from that investment. And I say that because, just keep that in mind, that was from a global perspective. I think when we look at transportation and investment, it's got to be holistic. It's got to be the whole island, and it's got to cover all aspects. So when I take that a little bit further, I think there are 3 questions that need to be asked. One is, why do we want investment in transportation? And by the way, transportation is just an element of infrastructure. Why do we want it? 2, what type of transportation do we want to invest in? And 3, what's the benefits? If I look at the first part, I'm just going to look at businesses, growth in businesses, and I'm going to give a couple of examples. Tourism. This island has some of the greatest facilities and attractions on the entire eastern coast. If you take Cape Breton and you look at Cape Smoky, under the guidance of Martin Kedgeville and what they're doing there and how they're building it out, they saw a 300% plus increase in skiers' passes between February 23 and February 24. That's 1. 2, if you look at our golf courses, we've got 2 of the best golf courses in North America. One of them, if I can remember correctly from the stats, is one of the top 10 in the world. I also look at the Port of Sydney. Did you know that they have or had last year, 118 cruise ships with 235,000 passengers. And that is just looking at tourism. You then look at the other aspects of growth of business, and you can look at bulk cargo. What's that mean? Well, we have two of the deepest ports in North America. And for that aspect, we can handle bulk with transportation investment. So I'm going to go on from growth in businesses to new business, which is what the island needs to attract as part of investment. We have, and I'm going to pick on two places. One is a Assurance Centre. Oh, sorry. Thank you for that. Someone actually waved. So the Assurance Centre. The Assurance Centre is one of the top 5 leading research institutes for biotech in North America. And why? Because they are just about to open up a 10,000 litre capacity for innovation in the biotech. If they get on to 100,000 litre capacity, you're looking at the top institution for research for biotech in North America. Second aspect, green energy. We're just about to open 2 hydrogen plants in Point Tupper. With that and the expansion for green energy in hydrogen, what's the one thing they're going to need? Electricity. Electricity is not going to come from existing original power plants. It's going to be, if at the end of the day you look at it, it's wind. And we have, as an island, one of the best places in the world for constant supplies of high-grade wind energy provision. Last thing that I want to go on to on the why is the benefits to existing businesses and individuals. If we develop and invest in transportation, and I'm talking holistic here, those existing businesses and individuals can reap benefits, and I'll come on to that towards the end. Second question, what transportation do we need to invest in? To me, there's no specific one, it's all of them. Seabound transportation is cheapest in the world. We have, as I said, the 2 deepest ports. By the expansion and connection of those 2, we could take in more ships, bigger ships, more cargo for both inbound and outbound. If we then look at the, from a perspective of trying to connect them, we need rail. We need rail to connect the ports, to work together to get transportation of in- and outbound goods on and off the island. At the moment, it will all be done by road. We need infrastructure on our roads. Let's be honest, we've got 2 lifelines for this island, one up one side, one up the other. The roads, in all honesty, aren't the greatest. They're not used to vast, heavy-duty vehicles. You can see it. Most of the ruts and the edges are being worn away, and they will do. The weather and the sheer volume will wear them. We're not sufficiently reliant on those 2 veins. And as we saw the other week at Big Pond, you get one accident, you're blocking half the island off. The trucks especially, they can't turn around. They just get stuck there. It costs money, it costs time, and it cuts off the lifelines to the island. I then look at rail. As I said, we need rail to transport between the island and the goods to help the growth. And the final bit on that transportation, what's happening at the airport is fantastic. I can see the growth is going to come, especially with Miles driving that. However, we need to create the infrastructure that allows for more transportation, whether it's people or cargo via that airport. The infrastructure is there for the airport. It needs to grow and it needs the support. Last aspect, and sorry, I'm just dominating this, by the way. Last point, the benefits. The benefits are huge, trust me. If the infrastructure investment is provided for transportation, and I do think it needs to be a holistic, strategic plan that needs to be created, we will see a growth in jobs, a growth in new business, We will see efficiencies through a reliant chain of transportation. We will see environmental benefits because it's efficient. That all, at the end of the day, invites people to the island. And I'm going to go back to the group. We look for entrepreneurs, investment for new companies, succession planning. If you don't have the infrastructure, anyone who comes to the island will say no. And without that investment, we are just simply going to circle on ourselves, as I think has been pointed out historically, when you look at people like the Father Greg McLeod, who said, basically, we have to look after ourselves. Time to stop. Time for investment in our transportation. I'm going to stop waffling now.
Thanks. I think we'll probably have some questions back and forth between the panelists in a bit, but I'll go to Dan first with a separate question. So Dan, kind of building off what Paul mentioned, you recently completed a report focusing on existing opportunities related to rail infrastructure. If you can maybe touch on some of the findings with respect to local business and how transportation systems in Unama'ki, Cape Breton enable our region to capitalize on those opportunities.
Okay, is this working okay? Thanks, Tyler, and I'm really glad to see the big turnout here. It's really important that everybody's supporting this, and it's just great. A couple of years ago, several businessmen here in Cape Breton decided that they were being impacted by the lack of rail. So they got together to lobby some of the politicians and the government people, and the Nova Scotia Department of Transportation put $25,000 in, and ACOA, federal government, put $25,000 for a $50,000 rail study. I put together a team to bid that study. I have contacts with rail experts across the country and got some of the top engineers and logistics experts to do that study. We were successful in winning it, and we completed that study. The idea was that when Genesee, Wyoming left, they said they needed 10,000 cars a year to make it viable. But so we went to see how many cars we could get from local business here. Kathleen's Novaport container terminal, if that went, the rail went, it was just part of it. But we're hoping that if we could see how many cars we could get without the container terminal, that would also help Kathleen's group to push it over the top. The end of the study, we did a lot of statistics. A lot of these experts I have are statistics, commodity experts. They understand commodities and movement of stuff by rail all across the country. The report is online with the partnership. I would say just read the executive summary because those statistics will put you to sleep. But we came up with a number of 9,300 cars, which wasn't the 10,000. Then the goalpost got moved. They said, no, we need more than 10,000. Nevertheless, we're close. We got to 9,300, and I think we're only one big carrier or one big user of the railway to put that over the top and to develop the economic plan that would make it viable. So later on, the other questions, I'll be talking about what possible users we could get to put us over the top and to get the rail back on going again. So my job was to coordinate these experts, and I also interviewed 16 major companies here. And I'll tell you, the response was great. Every company I interviewed says, yes, we want the rail back. We used to have the rail. We need the rail back. I did not have one negative interview where somebody said, no, we don't need the railway. So those 16 companies, some of them are represented in the room here today. Certain things like building supplies would be advantaged by rail. The other thing we did is we talked to Marine Atlantic, Gerald Glantz here, the VP, about the possibility of, one of the things was bringing in what they call TOFCs, trailers on flat cars. If you go out west, you see the flat cars with the trailers on them without the tractor, so they could bring them in. We looked at a terminal right beside Marine Atlantic, and Marine Atlantic loads what they call drop trailers, so it didn't really matter to them if they came in on a train or with a tractor. But it would certainly help with the transportation of goods to Newfoundland. We also talked to Newfoundland about how this could benefit the west coast of Newfoundland. So all in all, the report was fairly successful. We didn't get enough to get a rail line, but we got a lot of people thinking about it and a lot of great information.
Awesome. Thanks, Dan. I'm sure some of the panelists will have some questions for you on that. But Kathleen gets the shortest question, but maybe the most interesting. How does the current state of transportation, in your opinion, how does that affect the region's overall status in terms of opportunity for economic growth and impact to not only just the economics but the communities? What's your take on the current state of transportation?
Yeah, no, it's a valuable question to ask, and I think I always think it's important to focus on what we do have today, because we often it's easy to see what we don't have, and I know that I'll mention rail in a second, but certainly in the past couple of years, as we've been promoting the Sydney Harbour and the value proposition of not only the harbour and the location of Sydney, but the entire region for an economic development opportunity that is tremendous. We also take the time to talk about all the things that we do have. So when it comes to transportation, and I know that my other fellow panelists have mentioned it, but we do have a fantastic regional commercial airport. We have a harbour that's adjacent to a 100 series highway. We have Marine Atlantic connecting mainland Canada into Newfoundland. Our harbour is dredged to 16.5 meters, so we have a navigational channel, which also makes us a strategic harbour for commercial development. So there's a lot of really fundamental assets, attributes to the many assets that we have within our region that makes us strategic to attract economic development. I think the biggest piece that we're missing, and often, what's going to come up, I think, a lot in these conversations, is around rail. And as it relates specifically to Nova Port, which has been a development that has been in this community for more than 15 years, rail has been the inhibitor of the realization of that development. And back in 2014, when that became non-operational, it was never, I think, understood by anybody in the community that today would be sitting here, 10 years later, and that rail line still sit non-operational today. But what we do have is we have a rail bed, and that rail bed does exist, and it does have the ability to be rehabilitated, whether it's for use for commercial use, as Dan referenced, or for tourism, as Paul referenced, and potentially even both. So I think from our experience, and just from my experience, both being at the Chamber and then certainly in the role that I am in today, is that we very much have a lot of strategic assets as it relates to transportation. And it is one of the fundamentals of economic development in any region. And we're strategic in many ways due to our location. So I think, going forward, certainly advocating and continuing to support the existing the existing transportation assets that we have. But the advocacy and the continuation of rail is integral to the future of Cape Breton, I believe. And not just from a port perspective, but just in terms of the way that the world is going. And as Paul mentioned, green energy, outside of just wind, but manufacturing, battery, fuel cell development, all critical minerals, all of these different opportunities, these economic opportunities, do require rail. And Cape Breton specifically is incredibly strategic from a location perspective globally in any one of those categories. And I have the privilege of working with Invest Canada, Invest Nova Scotia, and their investment attraction teams. We've been on the short list many, many times as it relates to many of these opportunities that I just referenced. And it's not to say that any of these global companies can never not come here, but certainly rail does often come down to rail and the risk that they're willing to take to kind of continue in the process of evaluating Sydney and Cape Breton Island as a viable opportunity to establish these types of facilities and factories here on the island. So I think, we're not starting from scratch. We have much of the recipe to attract economic development opportunities, create significant job creation here in the region. But I do think today, as we sit here, I think rail is probably the single biggest transportation opportunity that we have before us. And we do have the asset on the ground today that does have the ability to be rehabilitated. And I think it's all of our hope that we do all live to see a day in the not so far future where we see that operational again.
So I have a list of questions, as you know, but you guys aren't shy. Is there any comments that you want to make kind of back and forth?
Yeah. Not shy. I look at, as you have both said, is about, the rail. I totally agree that rail would be a huge asset to the island. Totally agree. But to get the infrastructure repurposed and adequate to take volume, I think that as I go back to the holistic view about all aspects of transportation has to be addressed first. And the first one I always see is it's going to be road, simply because the vehicles are there already. I don't think it's the greenest way. I don't think it's ultimately the cheapest way. And I don't think it's healthy for tourism to see stacks of trucks. I'm sorry for those who are lorry drivers, etc., but that's how I see it. So my thing is, how long before rail can be introduced and the funding?
Dan, anything to add to that?
Yes, the hard part is the funding. Building the railway is not that hard, or renovating it. We could start tomorrow if we had the money, but the funding envelope is the issue. And who would fund it, and so that's the main, it always boils down to the money.
I would just add to that, I think with anything, there needs to be a business case, and there needs to be guaranteed business for a line. And so when we think of rail, it's not ever, I don't know if we'll ever see the Field of Dreams concept with the rail line on Cape Breton Island. We will fix it, and then the business will come. There has to be a justification for that initial investment for the rehabilitation. If we knew that we could put rail cars on that rail today and it was just a matter of attracting the business, I think we'd be having a different conversation. But there's a significant investment that's going to go into that line, not only to rehabilitate the line for it to be operational, but for it to be able to handle the type of commercial operations that would be required today versus how it operated in the past. With that said, I think, as representing the Novaport voice today, but just also as somebody who lives and believes in the future of this island and certainly the CBRM, we have been steadfast in our vision to develop a multi-use port. And the narrative in the community today is that our focus is on green energy, offshore wind, but we've never abandoned our view of developing a multi-use port that could also welcome containers into our harbor, whether it be an entire, the full footprint or partial or what have you. But that requires a rail line, and it's always been the narrative of the chicken or the egg, what comes first. And so it's never been the fact that container cannot happen in the Sydney Harbor. In fact, we know with absolute certainty that it can, and we've been at the 11th hour in those discussions, but it's always come down to rail. So I think having the business case is incredibly important. And we've been a part of these narratives before, and not so long ago, about our airport during the pandemic. And there was a very scary time where there was no commercial flights at our airport, and there was this real fear that those planes would never come to Sydney again. And we did a lot of hard work in advocating for that at the time, but I think again, the fundamental conversation came down in working with the leadership at the time was around the business case for air in Sydney. So, and at that time we were obviously living in a very unique circumstance. So it is always going to come down to that, because the rail line, the airport, any of these modes of transportation does justify a business case. So I think that that's what we have to collectively not only understand, but also recognize that we need to do our collective efforts to ensure that we have take the opportunities to attract them as well.
Awesome. So I think Dan was going to kind of comment on that with some specific opportunities, but I'll let you lead into that, Dan.
Sure. Thank you. No, I just want to talk about a couple of years ago, and for 4 years, I worked with the Port of St. John, New Brunswick, as the owner's engineer for a $210 million redevelopment of the container side there. What they did, they were successful in getting gateway funding for that port. So they got $210 million. about 60% of it was federal and 20% was provincial, and then they raised the rest of the money themselves. So what happened was they built the second container berth there, and with that happening, a lot of the container companies saw that, and there was a line that years and years ago, the CP line went from Halifax through the Annapolis Valley and across on the ferry to St. John and then on to Montreal. Back in the 80s, CP sold that line from St. John to Montreal to a small operator, much like ours was sold. And the same thing happened. They abandoned it somewhere in the late 80s. But with talking about the chicken and the egg, with St. John getting this second container berth, CP bought the line back, and it's about 280 kilometers. It's twice as long as ours, and they spent about $300 million rehabilitating that line. And now that line is operating between Montreal and St. John. They needed more container space for the growth, so they went back and got more gateway funding for $42 million. And that's just an example. The west side of St. John Port, if you go there, is all containers and other industry. The east side is cruise ships, just almost similar to what we have right here. And that port is becoming one of the most successful ports in Canada. And I think it's a model for us to look at, because you can't have, really, the railway wouldn't be successful without the port, and the port wouldn't be successful without the railway. So the St. John model that I worked on, and I think it's applicable for here. We just need the $200 million, that's all.
I'll empty my pocket. I'll empty my pocket.
Yeah, well, we won't pass the hat here, but we'll get a little ways there. But maybe Paul, I'll go back to you and kind of bringing this back. We've talked a lot about opportunities here that Kathleen and Dan have talked about. And you talked about some of the new opportunities that are emerging from the biotech industry, from the Forshurance Center and so on. But with those new industries, but what about our existing industries? Maybe you can speak a little bit to how do you think efficiency and reliability of a transportation system in whatever form, how does it affect the competitiveness of local businesses with their ability to either import goods, export goods, sell goods, perform? I think with your role with the Capital Group, you'll see some of those impacts that those businesses have and how it is either positively affecting them or perhaps negatively impacting them.
I will answer that question, but I just want to pick up what my two colleagues have spoken about. I think there is a huge connection between the ports that we have here and the future. And I keep thinking to myself, what is a catalyst to get that investment? What is it going to be? And one of the things that always strikes me, and it does lead on to, about what the benefits are to existing businesses. If I just take green energy, and I'm going to go on to wind farms, because whether we like it or not, those hydrogen plants require literally more energy to produce ammonia and green hydrogen than we produce at the moment for the entire island for everything. The 2035 EV requirements by the government require in excess. For if you put a pure statistic, and it's out there, for the whole of North America, 2,200 gigawatts of energy for EV alone in 2035. Now, realistically, I don't think it's going to happen. However, those plants each need around 1.5 to 3 gigawatts, and we produce 3.5 gigawatts as Nova Scotia. Yeah, I think that's going to be an interesting debate. I think that is a catalyst, is the wind farm aspects. For that, you need the ports, you need the infrastructure to be there. To transport it, you need the rail. What are the benefits to local business? If you look at what it takes to construct a single turbine, with its pylons, its concrete casements, literally the support aspects to it, whether it's offshore and therefore the boats, the support, that's where benefits will come to businesses, both existing. We got the highest grade for concrete in North America, and it's on the island here. We can produce those blocks those floats that are required for offshore wind farms. I look at the greater picture and what's it mean for the rest of us? Well, here's the benefits and what it means for us and what it means for our future, for our children, our grandchildren, and anyone who else comes to the island. If you find that catalyst to get the investment in transportation, and I don't care where it starts, but I do agree rail is a very important aspect to this, is that you'll see more jobs. Because once you get businesses that have an efficient transportation process, which is economically viable, you should see competition. Competition normally drives prices downwards, but it also offers more opportunity and a variation of goods. It will also produce, by taking, if I look at it in the long term, vehicles off roads and putting it onto rail, there is a benefit to the environment. We don't need to damage what is a beautiful place. We don't need to do it. By doing that and taking more off the roads, less damage to the roads. Less damage to the roads also means more opportunity for tourism. Tourism for us is huge. Yes, it's seasonal. However, I'm going to go back to two aspects again. I look at what's happening in Cape Smoky and what they're trying to achieve. The golf courses we got here, just for two things. And I also look at by utilising the airport and getting more tourists and business personnel here, and with that, you will see business come along with good transportation. There is that overall benefit. When I look at the Visuran Centre, the reason I mention them, if they become the #1 biotech research institute in North America, I already know, speaking to some of their current companies that are there, that they are considering building manufacturing plants on the island. Why? Because they got the ports. They need feedstock coming in, and they need to export goods. The gateway to Europe and Asia and down the East Coast, it's there. It's already there. So we know that if we can just get the investment and push it forward, then you're going to see a natural growth and benefit to the island.
Anyone want to comment on that? I'm going to go back again, I guess, to those. We're talking a lot about future growth and future opportunities. How do we see improvements? Do we think if there's any tangible things that a business person or a community member would see immediately, as opposed, no one likes driving into a pothole. That would be an immediate benefit.
I'll tell you, I mean this politely, the one thing that really annoys me about us being on the island here, cost of fuel. I still can't get my head. I know it costs a little bit to travel a few extra miles to bring fuel to us, but it really does annoy me to know that I can go off the island for about 50 k's and get it 2 cents cheaper. There's one benefit. And how inflation is damaging our pockets. And the reason is the cost of fuel, just for individuals, but for companies bringing products onto the island, we naturally have to see an uptick. So the moment fuel goes up 1 cent, we feel the pain, more so here than we do elsewhere. Sorry, that's me having a personal rant, but there you go.
Well, I think maybe going back to one of the studies that Dan talked about, you talked quite a bit about the companies you interviewed. Everybody was super happy about it. Did they see an ability to impact their community, not just their business, with the introduction of rail, or perhaps discussion on improved air service, either to one of the two airports on the island, or again to the road infrastructure? Is there something that you're thinking people aren't really talking about in terms of improvements to our transportation infrastructure that would have an outsized impact on people's everyday lives?
Yes, Tyler, I believe it's a global sort of thing internally here. Like, people aren't necessarily talking, the rail has been gone for so long. It's not a common sort of thing. Like, the port has been here for a long time. Nobody in the general public's talking about the port development or the rail development or the roads or the airport. That's why we're here tonight, is we're trying to get public interest in how important this is to the whole community. Everything from building supplies to food, to all the stuff we do, stuff brought in for the big superbox stores. Everything relies on transportation. And our transportation system in Cape Breton is not that great for the reasons we're saying. We need development in the port, we need development in the rail, we need more business for the airport. So yes, it will mean a lot, the whole community, one step at a time.
Kathleen, are there any economic diversification options that we have? We've talked about green energy, we've talked about bioeconomy, we've talked a little bit about our traditional opportunities, but are there other diversification opportunities or job creation opportunities that we haven't landed on that you've touched on when you've been shaking the bushes with your development, or in maybe tangential connections that you've come across?
Yeah, I think, excuse me, I think, the conversation that Dan and Paul just had, I think is super valid because there does need to be a catalyst, right? The transportation infrastructure of this island fundamentally is a direct reflection of the economic health of the island, right? So as our transportation infrastructure improves or becomes more robust or is reintroduced like rail, I think that will be only because of a direct reflection of what is happening economically on this island. The amount of opportunity that exists around rail infrastructure in 2024 versus even 10 years ago, I think has dramatically improved, just the way that the world is shifting. I also think that having rail infrastructure located next to a strategic harbor that's largely underutilized but ready for commercialization is dramatically important in terms of, our value proposition. And it all does kind of relate back to the green transition and the green economy and the way that the world is moving as it relates to manufacturing specifically. And if we were to attract one manufacturing plant in any category of green energy, not necessarily just related to offshore wind, but it could be for battery or fuel cell development, that is quite literally thousands of jobs, potentially even tens of thousands of jobs, depending on kind of the spin-off that happens around it. And those numbers are proven. That I'm not just saying those numbers. It's actually almost too big to even imagine at this point. In terms of what opportunity would exist in and around rail. And then also I think critical minerals is something that I know has been within the narrative of economic development specific to this region, but also an enormous economic opportunity that also does justify rail infrastructure. And something that our island is incredibly rich in. So not to say that I can speak directly to that, but there are a lot of opportunities that can be justified or that can be justified to support rail, but having a catalyst and having robust port infrastructure for industrious use, much like our development seeks to develop, is incredibly important. And then as we know, the number of small businesses and startups that are spin-off of port development is tremendous. Offshore wind alone, with a robust hub port, has a spin-off of upwards of 150 to 200 small businesses within the local economy alone, directly related to energy or related industry around port activity. And that certainly doesn't include all other uses of port, like bulk, like container, and there's many others, So I think staying open to the idea of multi-use as an entire harbor is, I think, incredibly important. And also not abandoning our desire and our efforts to reestablish rail on our island. I think, again, I'll just reiterate that, we do have the asset today, although non-operational. It does require some work, but it's not out of reach. And I think ultimately the economic opportunities that come behind it. But if I were to highlight one that maybe we're not talking about as much, I think it is manufacturing. And we have already been qualified by the global marketplace that we are strategic on basically every other front outside of our transportation. So.
I think, Dan, you wanted to respond to that too. I think we got time for one more question, or a comment.
Yes, I said earlier on when I started, I said our rail study showed us we're about one major customer away from making it viable. When I worked with these rail experts, my colleagues out west, I learned an awful lot from them. And one of the interesting things was the movement of potash. Now, the three biggest producers of potash in the world are Russia, Belarus, and Canada being the biggest. Matter of fact, BHP Billiton, the biggest mining company in the world, is building the biggest potash mine in the world, north of Saskatoon. So with the geopolitical, the world now, with the war in the Ukraine, Russia has been sanctioned by Europe, the US, South America, and all that, so they cannot sell their potash to those countries. Therefore, they have to sell their potash to China, which they teamed up with. So that means Canada's potash that was going to China is going to be reduced a lot because that's the only place they can sell it. But on the other hand, Europe, Africa, Middle East, South America, all need potash. With 8 billion people in the world now, potash for fertilizer is becoming one of the most important ingredients. If you look at how are you going to get to Europe from Saskatchewan, or South America, or Africa, or the Middle East, it comes through the east coast of Canada. We have everything we need here in Cape Breton to put a port in here for delivering potash. And I think it's one of the things that could be really valuable here. Actually, in St. John, New Brunswick, as I go back to my St. John, they ship potash out of St. John from Saskatchewan. They have a big, huge terminal there. They had it for their mines that went down, but it's actually cheaper to ship it to, amazingly, from Saskatchewan to St. John, because it's basically all downhill. And if you go to the west coast, you got to go through the Rockies, and the fuel in the locomotives drives the transportation costs way up. So I see a tremendous opportunity for us here for potash. Some people may, we had the dusty coal and all the coal dust problems. Potash cannot get wet. So it's in a sealed shed here, it's in sealed rail cars, it goes on sealed conveyors into sealed boats. So the other one that was interesting that these my colleagues talked to me was about canola oil. Saskatchewan's also the biggest producer of canola oil. They sell a lot to China, but China has cut back in the last 3 years because of disputes with Canada, the two Michaels and stuff like that. So they're looking at shipping canola oil to Europe and the Middle East. And anybody went to the grocery store and saw what olive oil costs, it's amazing. The Mediterranean are looking for canola oil now as a replacement, another bulk commodity that could come through here. So I see lots of opportunities for Sydney Harbour, for the rail, and the whole thing with other commodities. We just got to get out there and market it. Tyler has put a request in to the provincial government for funding to do studies and to talk to people in Saskatchewan and other areas and sell our port. We got to get this message out there that we're available in that. And one last comment. When I was a young kid in the 50s, a long time ago, I used to live with my grandparents, and they lived in South Bar in a farmhouse. And I would at night count the boats that were in Sydney Harbour. I mean, nothing to have 9 coal boats lined up there waiting to get into the international pier. Boats with iron ore coming in for Sydney Steel to make the steel. Boats with steel going out. The naval base was here, military boats were here. The whole harbour was full. And all steel and coal are gone. I'd like to see with this new commodities that this harbour to be full again. Right, Kathleen? Container boats, offshore wind. Okay, thank you.
Part of this session, we'll introduce the guests. They'll come up and take their seat. We have some predetermined questions for them. And the second part of that will be an open mic question and answer from the audience. So let me invite the individuals up here. Hoyles Whiting from Polysteel Atlantic. Polysteel Atlantic is a manufacturer of synthetic rope for the fisheries industry. They produce locally but export their products around Atlantic Canada. Brad Jacobs, Colburn Auto Group. Brad is the general manager of Colburn Auto Group's car dealership network, which brings manufactured vehicles into the region from North America. Oh, okay. Mara Brown and Nolan Brown, Castle Building Supplies, BML Metals and Roofing, manufacturers of metal roofing and gutter products, and vendors of building supplies, sending products all over Nova Scotia. Ryan McDonald from Tom McDonald Trucking was unable to join us this evening, so regrets from Ryan. So we have Jim Gillis, Escazone Cold Storage and Live Store, an operator of cold storage and warehousing facility in Sydney involving live lobster storage. And Reed Campbell, Polytech Windows, manufacturer of windows and doors in Cape Breton for residential and commercial construction. Is Reed here? Okay, so Reed is not here. All right. So we have 5 panelists here, so it should be quite busy. So what we'll do, just a little housekeeping for our panelists. Sometimes we get excited and we really want to talk about and have some passion about the topic, but we have a limited amount of time. So I'll be sitting right here, and this is for the panelists. And as you answer a question, if you're getting a bit lengthy, I'll approach the podium and that'll be your signal to wrap it up, and we move on to the next question or the next candidate. So, all right, so first question, and it's geared to all of the panelists. How does the transportation system impact your business and community, the current transportation system? So we'll start at the end and we'll work right across the stage.
Am I on? Okay. Well, thanks for coming out today, guys. At Live Store Sydney, we are a cold storage. There's a few different things we do there, but our prime business is cold storage for the seafood industry. So pretty much everything that comes and goes is on a tractor trailer. So the transportation is critical to our business. We don't really have much to do with the trucks themselves. It'd be the people that are shipping the product that send their trucks, but we're dealing with them every day. The other thing that we do there is we pack containers that'll end up in Halifax and shipped off to Europe or Asia. So a port here in Sydney would certainly help us out a lot. So we're hopeful that comes someday. But yeah, that's it. We're loading and unloading trucks every day at the cold storage facility.
This on? Perfect. So, Kent, thank you for the opportunity here tonight. Just for those that are here and don't know me, like Kent, my name is Hiles. It's okay. It just, but nonetheless, well, transportation, of course, it's huge for us. We typically bring in, 5 to 6 million pound of product from the Gulf of Mexico or from Asia, convert that into rope, and virtually every pound of it is shipped back out. So, I've got stuff coming here on ships, trying to get to Halifax as far as close as we can get it. Rail cars coming and stopping in Port Hawkesbury, and then I got to store it there, ship it by truck down to us. So, yeah, everything to bring our material in. And then, when it comes to just business meetings and whatnot, our airport, it takes a lot for me to get around the Maritimes if I want to go and visit some customers in Newfoundland or Halifax. I got to jump in a car and spend a day or two driving or whatever. Can't just jump on a plane in the morning, fly somewhere and drive or come back in the evening. When I moved here in 2017, you could actually hop on a plane here, go to Halifax for a meeting in the morning, meet with some customers or clients, and be back for supper. It was a little bit convenient, but nonetheless. But no, there's all kinds of opportunities with transportation here, even to the point of, we'll bring it down to a local topic in just the local public transit and some of the challenges and opportunities that's providing. There's more and more of our folks here in our workforce that are using public transit today than 5, 10, 15 years ago, and we need to be able to get them to the industrial centers, the SID ports, the North Sydney industrial parks and places like that. So anyway, thank you. So.
Good evening, folks. Thank you for the opportunity to be here tonight. So Colburn Auto Group has 2 car dealerships. We have a Ford dealership and a Chrysler dealership. And supply chain for us is incredibly important. I mean, we're in an industry that's supply chain dependent. We actually have our vehicles come to us part of the way by rail. So we have a number of vehicles coming from Mexico, number coming from the US, Kansas City and Illinois, Ohio, and also from Canada. When those vehicles come, they stop by rail until they get to Moncton. And then when they get to Moncton, they will sometimes sit for as long as 30 to 45 days before they get to Sydney. So any business person would tell you that 2 of the most important elements of doing successful business are time and the time value of money. And what happens in our industry, which creates a bit of a bottleneck, is that the transportation providers, the haulers that take the vehicles to us, are understaffed and overwhelmed. And this has been an increasing problem since COVID. So when those vehicles are leaving the rail yard in Mexico or the US or Canada and they're being shipped to us, we get invoiced for that product the day that it's sent.